Daf Yomi, Tractate Avodah Zarah, page 71. Top of the page. We are just starting the Gemara now. The bottom of the previous Amud was the Mishnah. Now here's the Gemara on the top of the page with the words Ureminhi. Ureminhi, Ir Shikavshua Karkom. Kol Koina Shivitocha Pesulos. Amarav Mari, Lenasech En Panai, Libaol Yesh Panai. The Gemara raises a contradiction to the assumption that soldiers during wartime do not have time to commit transgressions from that which is taught in another Mishnah in Ketubot 27a. With regard to a city that was conquered by an army laying siege, all the women married to priests located in the city are unfit and forbidden to their husbands due to the concern that they were beat. Rav Mari resolved the contradiction and said, they do not have time to pour wine for libations, as their passion for idolatry is not pressing at that time, but they have time to engage in intercourse because their lust is great, even during wartime. That's the Talmud. Now we start a new Mishnah. Mishnah Omnin Shal Yisrael Sheshalach Lahem Nochi Chavesh Shel Yain Esach Mischaron Mutar Lomar Ten Lanu Et Dameha Mishenichnisa Lerushutan Asur. The Mishnah says, with regard to Yehudi craftsmen to whom a non-Yehudi sent a barrel of wine used for a libation in lieu of their wage, it is permitted for them to say to him, give us its monetary value instead. But once it has entered into their possession, it is prohibited for them to say so, as that would be tantamount to selling the wine to a non-Yehudi and deriving benefit from it. And now the Talmud. The Gemara says, Zog the Talmud, Omer of Yehuda Moav. Rabbi Yehuda says, the Rav says, it is permitted for a person to say to a non-Yehudi, go and placate the collectors of the governmental tax on wine for me, and I will reimburse you subsequently. And if he pays the tax with wine used for a libation, even if he pays the tax with wine used for a libation. ולתחתי לעוצר, אבל לרב ולתחתי לעוצר, כמה? הלא דמיה, אלא להר, אבל אומר לא מלתני מן העוצר. One of the sages raised an objection from a Braita. A person may not say to a non-Yehudi, go in my stead to the commissary to pay the wine tax for me. If he pays it in wine used for a libation, Rav said to him, you say that the case I'm referring to is similar to one who says to a non-Yehudi, go in my stead to the commissary. In that case, since he says in my stead, whatever the non-Yehudi gives the commissary is considered as though the Yehudi gave it himself. This case that I'm referring to is comparable only to that which is taught in the Braita, but the Yehudi may say to the non-Yehudi, save me from the commissary. New Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Pasak ad shelo madad, dam yav mutarim, madad ad shelo pasak, dam yav asurim. In the case of a Yehudi who sells his wine to a non-Yehudi, if he fixed the price before he measured the wine into the non-Yehudi's vessel, deriving benefit from the money paid for the wine is permitted. It is not tantamount to selling wine used for a libation, as the non-Yehudi purchased the wine before it became forbidden, and the money already belonged to the Yehudi. But if the Yehudi measure the wine into the non-Yehudi's vessel, thereby rendering it forbidden, before he fixed the price, the money paid for the wine is forbidden. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. Amra Meimar Mashicha Begoy Kona Tida Dehani Pasai Mishadre Pardashni Leadadi Velori de Bahu Rav Ashi Amar Leoilam Emalach Mashicha Begoy Koine Vehadi Lehodre Bahu Deramus Rucha Hu Dinekita Lehu. A Meimar says the legal act of acquiring an object by pulling it applies to a non-Yehudi. Know that it is so, as those Persians send gifts to one another and do not retract them, which shows that they acquire one from another by pulling the object alone, even without paying for it. Rav Ashi says, actually, I will say to you, that pulling an object does not acquire it in a transaction involving a non-Yehudi, and the fact that they do not retract their gifts is not due to the halachot of acquisition, but because they are taken over by haughtiness and consider it shameful to retract a gift. Ravashi כי חייליתו חמרה גויים שיקלוזו זבנאי ובהד כאלון, and in brackets says כאלו לאו ולא נקיתו בהדי וזוזי אף זיפנו והדר שכאילו מינייהו כי הכי תהווה עלמה גבייהו Dilo bididu hachi ki kahaviyain sefer shutchayu v'shutaychu kahavi v'chi shakiltu d'meyain nesef ka shakiltu v'yisal kedaytech v'shir b'goy koine. Rav Ashi said, from where do I say that the acquisition by pulling does not apply to non-Yehudim? It is from that which Rav said to certain wine shopkeepers. When you measure wine for non-Yehudim, take the dinars from them, and then measure the wine for them. And if they do not have dinars with them readily available, lend them dinars, and then take those dinars back from them, so that it will be a loan provided to them that you are repaying. As if you do not do so when it becomes wine used for libation, it becomes so in your possession, and when you take the money, it will be payment for wine used for libation that you are taking. Rav Ashi concludes his proof for his opinion, and if it enters your mind that pulling an object requires it in a transaction involving a non-Yehudi, now returning to 71b, top of the page, with the words mid mashke. Mid mashke, goy kanye yenesach lo hadi nagabe. From the moment that he pulled it, the non-Yehudi acquired it, whereas it did not become wine used for a libation until he touched it. Therefore, the seller can receive payment for the wine he sold, because at the time of the acquisition, the wine was permitted. Vaitel ideka kayal berami lemanat Israel hachinami lo tzrich edeka kayal leverami lemanat nigoy. The Gemara rejects this proof. If it is a case where the seller measures the wine and pours it into the vessel of a Yehudi, it is indeed permitted to do so without receiving payment first. Rav's ruling is not necessary except in a case where he measures the wine and pours it into the vessel of the non-Yehudi, which contains wine used for a libation, and the wine is rendered forbidden upon contact with the vessel even before the non-Yehudi acquires it by pulling it. Sof kimat laveiro dimonakanya yanesachano haviyad yelamatina dimonashmamina nitzachibu. The Gemara raises an objection. Ultimately, even in this case, when the wine reaches the interior airspace of the non-Yehudi's vessel, he acquires it, as this too is a mode of acquisition, and it does not become wine used for libation until it reaches the bottom of the vessel, making contact with it so the acquisition occurs before the wine becomes forbidden. Can one conclude from this that, in the opinion of Rav, a stream of liquid serves as a connection between two bodies of liquid? If so, when the Yehudi pours the wine into the non-Yehudi's vessel, the flow of wine that is in contact with the forbidden wine at the bottom of the vessel will render all the wine being poured into the vessel forbidden. No. The Gemara rejects this conclusion. No. A stream of liquid does not serve as a connection, and therefore, and therefore, if the non-Yehudi is holding the vessel in his hand, the non-Yehudi indeed inquires the wine before it becomes forbidden, and therefore the money paid for it is permitted. Rav's ruling is not necessary unless the non-Yehudi's vessel is out of the ground, so that there is no active acquisition before the wine becomes forbidden. The Gemara asks, but let the vessel of the non-Yehudi acquire the wine from the moment it enters the interior airspace. Can one conclude from it this, that if the buyer's vessels are in the domain of the seller, the buyer does not acquire the merchandise once it is placed in his vessels? This is an issue that is subject to a dispute between the sages, which remains unresolved. Interesting. It's unresolved, but there's no teku. I wonder why. Okay. Maybe to take it somewhere else. No, maybe that's the case. The Gemara rejects this. No, actually, I could say to you that the buyer acquires the merchandise in such a case. But here, where the wine is rendered forbidden before being acquired by the non-Yehudi, we are dealing with a case where there is a remnant of wine remaining on the mouth of the non-Yehudi's jug, which renders the wine poured into the jug forbidden, as each bit of wine becomes libation wine when it comes into contact with the remnant of wine on the mouth, as it is poured into the jug. This is why Rav told the wine shopkeepers to take the money before measuring the wine into the non-Yehudi's vessel. וכמן דלא כרבן שמעון בן גמליאל דאי כרבי שמעון גמליאל אמר כל הגויים חוץ מדמי יין נסח שבו. The Gemara raises an objection in accordance with whose opinion does Rav say this. It is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, as if it were in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Doesn't he say that libation wine that became mixed with other wine may all be sold to the non-Yehudim for the monetary value of the entire mixture, except for the value of the wine used for a libation that is in this mixture? Accordingly, it is permitted to accept payment for wine that was poured into a non-Yehudi's vessel, and the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. The Gemara answers the explanation of this ruling can only be according to the opinion of Rav, who issued the ruling. And doesn't Rav say that the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel only in the case of a barrel of permitted wine that became intermingled with another barrel of libation wine, but not in the case of wine that became mixed with other wine in the same barrel? Therefore, explaining Rav's statement as contradicting the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is not problematic. Consequently, it cannot be proven from his statement that a non-Yehudi does not acquire an item by pulling it. Okay? Meisvei, meisvei, meisvei. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Meisvei, meisvei. Okay, Alokech. Grutaos מן הגויים ומצא בהן אבוי דזרה אם עד שלא נתן מעוז משך יחד אם מי שנתן מעוז משך יוליך לים המלח איסור לדעת משך בגוי כהנה אמר יחזיר The Gemara raises another objection from the statement of a Maimar that a Gentile, a non-Yehudi, can acquire an object by pulling it. A non-Yehudi can acquire an object by pulling it. It is taught in a Braita with regard to one who buys broken vessels made of gold or silver from the non-Yehudi and finds among them an object of idol worship. If he pulled the object of idol worship, thereby performing an act of acquisition before he gave money to the non-Yehudi, he may return the object of idol worship to the non-Yehudi. But if he pulled it after he gave the money to the non-Yehudi, he may not return it. Since the idol status was not revoked, he must take it and cast it into the Dead Sea. In that case, if it enters your mind that pulling an object acquires it in a transaction with a non-Yehudi, as a Maimar maintains, then why may he return the object once he has pulled it, since it is his? Abaye said he may return it because it appears to be a mistaken transaction, since he clearly did not intend to purchase an object of idol worship. Okay? Amar Rava. Reisha meratos evela meratos. Amar Rava reisha meratos reisha lo yahir to ze lo bas. Mitchazek avodah Zarah b'yad Yisrael. Diav zuze. Rava said, why in the second instance when he paid the money he may not return it? Is the purchase in the first clause a mistaken transaction, but the purchase in the latter clause not a mistaken transaction? Rather, Rava said the purchase in the first clause and the purchase in the latter clause are both mistaken transaction. But in the case presented in the first clause where he did not pay for the dinars, it does not appear as though there is an object of idol worship in the possession of a Yehudi, so he may return it. By contrast, in the latter clause where he did pay him the dinars, it appears as though there is an object of idol worship in the possession of a Yehudi, and therefore he must cast away the object rather than return it. Amar le mar kashisha bered Rab Chizda Rashi tashema hamoichin nachli pasak ad shelo madad tamavutahim. Amar I wonder why they switch off from Nachri to Goyim. I wonder. The Gemara cites a claim against Rav Ashi's opinion that a non-Yehudi cannot acquire an item by pulling it. Mark Ashisha, son of Rav Chizda, says, Rav Ashi, come in here an objection to your opinion from the Mishnah. In the case of a Yehudi who sells his wine to a non-Yehudi, if he fixed the price before he measured the wine into the non-Yehudi's vessel, deriving benefit from the money paid for the wine is permitted, as the wine was acquired by the non-Yehudi before he touched it. And if you say that pulling an item does not acquire it in a transaction involving a non-Yehudi, why is the money paid for it permitted? Rav Ashi replied, here we are dealing with a case where the non-Yehudi paid him a dinar in advance before the measuring, thereby acquiring the wine with money. But one of the sages raised an objection. If that is so, say the last clause. But if the Yehudi measured the wine into the non-Yehudi's vessel, thereby rendering it forbidden, before he fixed the price, the money paid for the wine is forbidden. And if he paid him a dinar in advance, why should the money paid for be forbidden? Rav Ashi said to him, and according to you, as you say that pulling does acquire items in a transaction involving a non-Yehudi, why in the first clause is the money paid for it permitted, and in the latter clause the money is forbidden? Rather, what have you to say? You must say, to explain the distinction between two cases. You say that when the Yehudi fixed the price, the non-Yehudi consequently relied on him, that the sale would not be cancelled, and so the sale was concluded by the pulling. But in a case where he did not fix a price, the non-Yehudi did not rely on him, that the sale would not be cancelled, and therefore the sale was not concluded. The DD Ledidi nami achal gav dikadim le dina pasak samchadaite lo pasak lo samchadaite. According to my opinion as well, even though the non-Yehudi gave him a dinar in advance, if he fixed a price, the non-Yehudi relied on him, that the sale would not be cancelled. And if he did not fix a price, the non-Yehudi did not rely on him, that the sale would not be cancelled. Amar le Ravina Lavashi Tashema Tamar Rabchia Baraba Amar Yochanan ben Noach נהרג על פחות משווה פרוטה ולא ניתן להישבון ואי אמרת משיחה וגוי אין הכהנה אמר נהרג. Ravina said to Rashi, come in here, another proof against your opinion, as Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says a descendant of Noah, meaning a non-Yehudi, is executed by the court for the theft of even less than the value of one pruta. But if he stole less than the value of one pruta from a Yehudi, it is not subject to restitution, meaning he is not obligated to return it, as the Yehudi presumably waived the debt. And if you say that pulling an item does not acquire it in a transaction involving a non-Yehudi, why should he be executed? He did not commit a legally significant act by stealing the item, as it remains in the possession of the owner. Mishum Nitzahid Israel. He's executed because he caused a Yehudi. Okay. I'm not condoning or agreeing. I'm just reading it. It would seem very racist here, but it says that because he caused the Yehudi distress by stealing it, even though the halachot of acquisition, the thief did not acquire it. Okay, that's what they're saying there. Okay, next.